Welcome to my channel, I'm Dr. Romano. In this video we're going to talk about how to establish your hedge fund and the proper methodology to use and how to go about finding investors. As I've mentioned in other videos, the hedge fund industry is the most lucrative industry there is. And of course the funds of funds industry will be the future, whereas the cycle with the investment banks, they've seen their peak after the collapse of '08. And of course we had the collapse of the savings and loans banks. And so everything's a cycle. And when you realize not everything is always going to be the same, then you realize, well, how could you take advantage of a great change that's happening? And that's an entrepreneur, as I made a video about that. Certain people think differently than others. But the point is, if you have an interest in trading, and you have been trading, you could be 20 years old, you could be 15 years old, you could be 50 years old, you could start at any point in time. Please remember to subscribe and do thumbs up. It's right there. It doesn't hurt to press it, but that will really help me out. Thank you so much. Now, of course, you need to have a track record of trading, okay? So that's through, you could possibly trade your family's capital and you create a separate managed account. Each person's capital is in a separate managed account. And when you first start out, that's how I highly recommend that you start trading, because you're creating a track record. And I highly recommend that you do it like that for 5 years, okay? The more years that you have, the better and the faster that you are to adapt with different market conditions. And you need to learn how to trade in a market cycle. So that would be 7 to 10 years. That's a market cycle. So if you traded for 5 years of that market cycle, well then I would say that you're highly successful on trading the different type of market conditions. Because you have to remember that your strategy that you've created, it may not work in every type of market condition. You may have done really well in a stock market collapse of 2020, but for 2022, you may have done really bad, and that's typical, but it's okay because that's normal. A strategy is not going to produce a return in every type of market condition. So don't feel bad if you did really bad in 2022. I'm Dr. Hedge Fund for a reason. I analyze hedge fund returns. I've been doing this for over 10 years, analyzing and improving a strategy for funds of funds. Now that you've been trading, let's say for a couple of years, minimum 5 years, and you feel like you are able to increase capital, you could now focus on your path on establishing your own hedge fund. So the first way to do it is find a company that has a template for your legal documents. There's many companies out there that will do it for a really inexpensive amount to create the actual structure, the 2 LLCs with the LP. The one LLC is the umbrella of the company. The second LLC is where you collect your fees. And the third entity, which is the LP, and that's the actual fund. And of course, you want to do that in Delaware. Don't listen to anyone else out there. You have to create those LLCs in Delaware. You don't have to live in Delaware, but it's just a legal thing that a lot of companies go to Delaware. Then you have to actually, depends on where you live in the US or the world, you want to reduce your taxes as a business owner. And yes, there's no corporate taxes for a hedge fund, but since it's a pass-through entity, you are going to have personal income taxes that you're responsible for. So this is why I highly recommend that you go to a state in the US where there's no state income tax. You have Florida, you have Wyoming, you have Washington, you have Nevada, you have Texas, you have New Hampshire, you have Tennessee, etc. And there's many other places which I haven't talked about. You could go to another country where there's no income taxes. That's very important because you're going to have to pay the federal tax rate. And now that it's going up to almost 40%, that's a lot of money. And yes, I could tell you how to reduce your taxes at the federal level. You create a private foundation in Liechtenstein, and you dump 30% of what you make every year into that private foundation. Then your private foundation becomes your client in your hedge fund. So it's just a way of moving capital around to reduce your taxes. And so you reduce your taxes by 11.5% approximately by taking 30% of your taxable income gross and dumping it into your own private foundation. And then the foundation becomes your client. So you're still managing the capital and you can still invest it. It's simply out of your name. And then once you pay the tax, percentage on 70%, whatever the tax rate, I guess, well, it's going to go up to 40%, whatever that number is, or it depends if you're in another country where there's no taxes. Well, you should dump all of what you made back into the private foundation, and then the private foundation becomes your client again. This way, you don't have the burden of such high taxes, because you have to remember, I'm not a tax doctor, but private foundations in Liechtenstein do not pay Liechtenstein tax as long as you don't live there, and you don't. So, of course, I'm not sure the legal situation in the US, whether the private foundation, if it's foreign, do they pay taxes on the gains for hedge fund investment? That would be long-term gains, etc. Whatever it is, there are ways to reduce your taxes. So you have to remember how to reduce your taxes and where to set up your fund. Then you need to select a hedge fund administrator. When you first start out, you have to cut expenses. There's a company in Florida that does a hedge fund administration. They also do hedge fund startups, meaning they have templates and they will help you along your way. There's also the hedge fund accountant that you have to select, and that typically is where you live. So if you live in Florida, let's say, then you have to select an accountant from there. Now, of course, you're also going to have the ability to raise capital to foreign investors. That they need a feeders fund, and the best place for that right now is actually the Cayman Islands. So you create a feeder fund in the Cayman Islands, and that could cost you, I can't remember the exact amount, whether it's 20 or 50,000. And or if you want to create a feeder fund in Switzerland, Switzerland's another great place, or Luxembourg. They say it's cheaper in Luxembourg. Whatever it is, you'll have to do it eventually. So once you have the structure complete and you transfer those separate managed accounts and they become a client in your hedge fund, you also have to think, what's the minimum investment legally? That's a huge something to think about, because if you do a higher amount, you'll be able to put your returns on your website, and so it's a way to market your own fund. Whereas I remember seeing some fund, it was $5 million minimum investment, but he had his returns and his PPM documents, all those documents on his website, and it was really, really nice to see that for once. It didn't seem like it was private, you know? It makes it too secretive. So that's another thing that you have to focus on, that you should actually make the minimum investment a little higher so that you get to put your returns on your website. And that's a way to market your fund, believe it or not, because hedge funds, there's restrictions. I'm not going to talk about them. That's something to think about, how you're able to market your fund, what's legal, what's not, etc. Put the lower amount, you may not be able to put your returns on your website. Next, you need to find people that will market your hedge fund investment for you, meaning make capital introductions. The next issue that comes about is ownership. Do not give your ownership of your company away to nobody. No 10%, no 20%, none of it. If you are the trader that's capable of making a return, you have enormous value for your clients. Don't get bullied by these bullies that convince you they're not going to put up capital unless they have ownership. Do not do it. You are the prized possession because you bring value to their income and their wealth. That's why I highly recommend that you focus on the little investors in the beginning, the 3 million, the 5 million, etc., to establish your company. And slowly but surely, you will gain those big clients. But once you hit $20, $30 million, you don't have to worry about being bullied to give ownership of a company away. Now, also, having a huge team behind you, if you're only managing $10 million worth of capital, or 15, let's say, I know in the beginning it's difficult to establish the fund's expenses, so you have to raise a lot of capital in the beginning. Remember, venture capitalists, they have a different type of thinking, that they're going to own part of the company and they're going to take 50% and they're going to then flip it over and sell it to make a profit. But in the hedge fund industry, you do not need their capital. If they don't understand that you're not going to give ownership away and they're refusing to put up money, then find somebody else. Right now is actually a great time to start a hedge fund, because investors are very, very desperate to make money. The real estate cycle has ended, it's starting over, so for a while they're not going to be making as much money as they are. Secondly, if they're only offering a 5, 6, 7% return, that's a disgrace for an investor to invest in a real estate whatever project, and they're only making 5, 6%. So people that are selling that type of investment, they're still making money, etc. They're able to do it. But if you're making a 5 to 20% return as a hedge fund manager trading other people's capital, well, you are value. And that's why I highly suggest you do not give ownership of your company away. Joan Crawford wouldn't dare if she was a hedge fund manager. JP Morgan wouldn't dare. And of course, look at Madonna. She became so wealthy because she demanded on what she wanted. And there's other people that have that similar personality. So if they could get what they want, then why can't you get what you want? You are only looking for investors to put up capital. That's it. No ownership, nothing. Once you hit a certain amount of money, you don't have to worry about that because they'll have to actually invest capital in your company, because they're not going to make it in what they've been making money in. Because we're going to a market cycle. The market cycle is manufacturing once again. For 40 years, since the mid-1970s, manufacturing has left the country and we participated in globalization. But that didn't work, and now it's become such an issue that America is weak in a way concerning if we don't have the real estate market and it's gone or it's reduced to make money in, that's a big problem. And so now manufacturing has to come back to the US. So as a manager of a hedge fund, you have to also take into account how you can benefit from those trades. Because there's going to be a lot of new products being put on the market, new companies going public, etc. So that's why I highly recommend that you do it this way. So these are questions that you need to ask your attorney. And of course, once you do put it in the private foundation's name, you'll never be able to take it back. But maybe that's the best thing to protect yourself legally, as well as the short term, which would be a trust. And these are things that you have to think about and ask your legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, but I want to give you the concepts on things to think about. You don't need to put the company in your name, because what if you're married? Or what if you do get married? In certain states, they're entitled to 50% of what you own. That's really scary. And so it's almost like being married to someone that you don't even want to look at after 10 years, but you have to stay married to them because then they own half your business and your real estate. So again, since you're going to be making money over your career, whether it's 40 years, 50 years, or 20 years, these are all things to think about. Your private foundation doesn't cost a lot of money. It costs between $20,000 to $40,000 for legal advice in Liechtenstein, and then you have to come up with the minimum contribution, which would be $40,000. So for $90,000, you'll have your Liechtenstein private foundation set up, or your trust in Belize. I'm not an attorney, but these are things to think about on how you could protect yourself and your assets against your future spouse or a future business deal that you do that goes sour. What if you start a real estate project and whatever, you go bankrupt in that project? That's a really big problem, so you have to be very careful because hedge fund managers can't have any type of bad record. You can't default on any type of loan before you establish that company and in the future as well. So be very careful on this. And those are all things to think about. Thank you so much for watching my video. I greatly appreciate this, and I wish you lots of luck. Please remember to subscribe and do thumbs up. It's right there. It doesn't hurt to press it, but that will really help me out. Thank you so much.